This is the Horse Radio Network. This is episode 26 of the Equestrian Legends radio show on the Horse Radio Network, presented by Pessoa, Clare Simpson. I am Glenn the Geek, founder of the Horse Radio Network, and our guest this week is Morgan legend Clare Simpson. But first, a word from Pessoa. The name Pessoa is legendary in equestrian circles. During his phenomenally successful career as a rider, Nelson Pessoa set his sights on creating the ultimate in saddle design. Not satisfied with the perfection of balance, aesthetics, and craftsmanship, Nelson's goal was to provide riders of every level the opportunity to train and compete in a true competition-level saddle, a saddle that would be an aid to their balance and riding style while offering comfortable fit for almost any horse. Most importantly, Nelson felt that the saddle was a tool that riders should not miss out on because of price. With these goals, the modern-day Pessoa was born, and it has come to encompass saddles, strap goods, horse boots, and blankets. That's right, Pessoa has some of the finest blankets on the market today. For example, their Pessoa Tundra 2100 denier turnout blanket is their toughest Pessoa blanket yet. This top-of-the-line, waterproof, breathable turnout blanket features a 2100 denier Teflon-coated ballistic weave ripstop outer shell. It has 300 grams of insulation with a 3M moisture-wicking, quick-drying lining. The patented closure system allows you to adjust the front closures just once and thereafter snap the blanket closed. Easy bend, elastic comfort neck gusset reduces shoulder rubbing and allows free neck and head movement. The removable double hook tail loop cover, adjustable leg straps, hidden elastic surcingle, action gullets, rust-proof hardware, and D-ring for optional neck rug attachment make this one of the finest, most technologically advanced blankets on the market today. Plus a 3-year warranty that covers fabric tearing because Pessoa backs the products that it sells. To learn more about Pessoa Tundra 2100 and all of the other fine products at Pessoa, ask your local retailer or visit them online at PessoaUSA.com. Clare Simpson is a legend in the Morgan horse world with multiple national, regional, and local titles in park saddle, English pleasure, and pleasure driving. He is known for breeding some of the finest Morgans under the Winterset name. Clare was born on a farm in 1933 in the Dust Bowl of Kansas at the start of the Depression. It was in these early tough farm years that Clare developed a love for horses. However, like so many of us, life sometimes gets in the way of our horse obsession, and that was the case with Clare. And what a life it was, as the Kansas boy born in some of the darkest days that this country has seen, ended up in New York City in an amazing career of 40 years in the TV and entertainment business. Clare eventually became vice president of NBC's daytime programming. Horses did come back into his life in a big way much later in life, but it did not take long for Clare to make waves in the Morgan world. The Horse Radio Network is proud to introduce equestrian legend Clare Simpson. Well, hello, Clare, and thank you so much for joining us and being being one of our equestrian legends.
I'm pleased to be here.
Well, I received you as a lead, and somebody said you need to have him on. He's one of our equestrian legends from the Morgan world. Julie Broadway, executive director of the Morgan Association, referred me, and I am so glad after I got researching your life and taking a look. I was so excited to talk to you tonight because you have led such an interesting life.
It has been an exciting life. A lot of ups and a lot of downs, but I think more on the positive side.
Well, and you've met some very interesting people over the years and really had two parts to your life, which we're going to get into a little bit here. You had the TV and entertainment side and then the horse side. And I want to talk about both because I think they're both fascinating, and we'll go through your life a little bit on both sides of the aisle. But first,
an interesting facet to that, Glenn, is that both of those sides are very, very similar. In the television business, you have few successes because the number of programs that are developed and ever on the air, it's probably like 2%. And the same thing with horses. Horses are, those wins come hard, but there are many times when you don't get in the ribbon, so they are similar.
Well, that's true. I never thought about it that way. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Kansas and what that was like. You were growing up, you were born in 1933, heart of the Dust Bowl, started the Depression, actually.
Right.
So what was that like for you and your family growing up on a farm out there in Kansas?
Well, my first recollection were these dust storms, and my mom would put my sister and I to bed in daylight, except it was getting dark out because of the storm, and cover us with damp sheets. And after the storm, those sheets would be gray because you had no way to keep out that dirt. Keep in mind that this was back in the early 30s. And outside, the farm implements would be, dust would be banked just like a drift of snow. And everything was very, very gritty. And as you probably know then, land was cheap. I think you could have bought it for a nickel an acre. My problem was that my dad just didn't have any nickels. And as a result, we left that part of the state and moved to another part of the state where we started a dairy farm, and which was intensive, a lot of work, but the whole family pitched in and we did everything.
Well, and in those days, of course, we were milking by hand, and I've known a lot of dairy farmers over the years, having grown up where I did. And boy, what a tough life! You can't ever get away. Those cows need milk twice a day. Period.
7 days a week. We had 26 Jersey Guernsey cows, and my dad did most of the milking, and we bottled that milk. We cooled it first, and then bottled it, capped it, put it in the wagon, took the old mare to town, and delivered it. And it was 10 cents a quart. Tough life. And not a great return, but it was a living. I don't know if we ever made we made enough to put food on the table, and that was about it.
Now you in those days too, that's where you were exposed first to horses.
That was my first experience. Other than when I was a little bit younger, we used to sneak out behind the barn and try to ride those calves, but we got caught doing that, and so that ended. And I didn't have a pony around, so a calf was similar, a little lower to the ground maybe. But Lady was a mare, a draft, not a draft, but a crossbreed of some sort. And my dad had fashioned this milk wagon together, built it with iron, it had iron wheels and a plywood top and side and bottoms, and made letters that said Simpson's Dairy. And my part there at this time, keep in mind at that time I was only about 8 or 9. And when my dad couldn't harness the mare and do the delivery, my mom would get out there. She would help me harness this mare, put me on the back and say, "Go to town, son." And off we would go to town, which was about a mile away. And there was no horsemanship involved here because this mare knew the route. And
right.
We'd go to town, and I would get out of there, and you had those little six-packs that you could carry. And there was this one restaurant that needed 2 of them, and I could only carry one. So I would carry one over. She would go down the street, come back down the alley, and meet me there. So it was she knew the route, and it was at the time. I don't know if it was that much fun, but when I look back years later, I said, that was a great experience, and I had to do all of that before I went to school, and I was about a mile away, and in those days you didn't have a mom or a dad who took you to school. You walked, and that was it. So that was my first experience with any kind of a horse.
Now, you were born in 33, so you were still pretty young. You were 7 or 8 when World War II really started to kick in.
I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
8 years old. Right.
What are your memories of what it was like in Kansas during World War II?
I was scared to death when I remember Pearl Harbor and we were at war. And to me, and how I had this perception of where it came from, I just don't know. But to me, that was like, there were going to be people marching into town with guns, and it was a frightening experience. And in those days, of course, then what happened was everybody would gather up all their scrap metal from the farms and take it into town, and in return for doing that, you would get a free ticket to the local movie house, which was at that time cost about 10 cents. And then the troop trains, they would come through, and of course you had fellows leaving, and we'd all go down to the train station and see them off. And that was the Santa Fe, Topeka, and the Atchison line, or was it the Topeka, Santa Fe, and something line, Atchison line, I guess. And only used on very rarely and never on the weekends, as I recall.
So you were just coming into probably your junior high and high school years when the war ended then.
Right.
Yeah. And you were in high school. Now, in those days, things were a little different than they are today. If you got to go to college, that was kind of a big deal.
It was a big deal, and my sister, unfortunately, did not get to go to college. But about the time she graduated from high school, my mother died in an accident. So that she didn't go to school, and I was fortunate then to be able to go to school. When I I wanted to play football because I grew up in this little town of 2,000 people. And it was a football hotbed. And 7th grade came, and I couldn't play football because of all my chores. And I think it was maybe in my 8th grade or 9th grade, I got the courage to ask my dad if I could play football. And he says, in so many words, he said, "Son, not a problem." He says, "Just get your 5 cows milked in the morning, your 5 cows milked at night." And that's what I did.
And you played all the way through high school, and then
high school. And actually, the football, it was a double-edged sword in that we were a small town, as I said, 2,000 people, 190 kids in high school. And my senior year, we were ranked 4th in the state, which was just an improbable thing. I mean, no small school had ever done what we did. And so I had football scholarships. Meanwhile, the Aggie teacher in high school, and I was an Aggie, took an interest in me. And in fact, there was a I belonged to FFA, and there was an FFA public speaking contest in Manhattan, Kansas, where Kansas State College was located. And he took an interest, and I wrote a speech and gave it there, and that was my big epiphany, because it was I finally learned to get up in front of people and have the fortitude to speak and do things. And that event probably changed my life more than anything else, even through college, because it was the thing that gave me the impetus to do the things in college that I did. Anyway, to make this story a lot shorter, is that I enrolled in Kansas State with a football scholarship in a vet school. And this was right after Korea, and there was a real shortage of men because of the war. And freshmen were eligible for the first time ever in the NCAA. And they said, "Look, Simpson, you're going to be on a traveling squad. There's no question. We've seen you play, and in fact, you're probably going to be starting."
What position, by the way? I didn't ask you.
I played a tight end. In those days, you had to play both ways. I played a tight end on offense and an outside linebacker on defense.
Oh, great! And with no helmets, you were getting smacked in the face all the time in those.
Yeah. And as my kids say, "Dad, were those leather helmets really? Did they really protect you?" So anyway, they gave me. They said, "Look, son, you're going to be on that traveling, and we want you to take a general curriculum, just so you'll be sure and stay eligible, this and that. And
don't take anything too hard.
we'll see you through vet school. Whatever it takes, we'll see you in vet school." Well, I got into communications, and the rest is history. I never got back to vet school.
Well, yeah, and we're going to get into that too. You took communications and ended up taking some television classes, right?
Right.
And that's where that interest came from. Now, at this point, was there any horse involvement at all? You really weren't into horses at all during this time.
No, but I had I did have a horse. To go back a little bit, during the war, one day I come home and my dad's acquired a saddlebred. And he's a rescue horse. He had gotten his pastern caught in a loop of wire, and it was raw and bleeding and so forth. And I never did know the details of this, but he had a tremendous scar right around the pastern, and it took a while before he was sound. So my dad, because when he was farming in western Kansas, it was all by horse, and you're out there with a plow and the reins, the lines around your neck, and you're plowing, walking along. He was a horseman, and so he decided that by golly, he was going to gate this guy, and he did. He took him up. We had a road that went up from our farm and came back down. And he says, as I understand, he says, you got to get him up that top of the hill. On the way down, you shake him into that slow gate, and that's what he did. So this became a project, and we didn't have any equipment. And somewhere he came up with a saddle and a bridle, and we started riding him. And then he decided that we were going to drive this horse, going to have a fine harness horse. So he found an old buckboard, and he took some bicycle wheels, and he got the shafts, he painted it black, and we got a harness, and we had two harnesses. One we cut up, or he did, and with rivets and so forth, made a tail set because you had to have a high tail for a saddlebred. And now we had a fine harness horse, and we showed all around those local shows. Now, part of the story is the mayor of our town was the guy who covered all the football games for the local newspaper, so he knew me. He also had saddlebreds. The only saddlebreds probably in the whole area there. Maybe you could probably go 30, 40 miles and not find any saddlebreds. So he had a big van, and we would go off to a horse show, and he'd put his 3 horses on and put mine on the back, and we'd go off to a horse show. And in those days, it was local, which would be amateur, and then the open. And I always showed, of course, in local shows, in local classes, and you go to a show, be a big tent, straight stalls, and you slept on a cot in back of your horse. That was the way it was. And I got a kick out of that. I had so much fun doing that. And then on my 16th birthday, my horse died. He colicked and died.
And when you graduated from college, then was your degree in communications?
It was in radio, television, speech.
Okay. How did you end up then going into the Navy?
Well, in those days, as you may have read, because you're probably a lot younger than I am, everybody had to serve. I mean, unless you had some kind of a deferment and you were going to continue your education, but you had to go in. And the Navy was offering an aviation officer candidate school down in Pensacola for college graduates. And the deal was you go down and you take pre-flight for 4 months, you get your commission, and then you go into flight school. So I took a physical in Kansas City in the past, went down to Pensacola, and I couldn't pass the eye test. And I still see somewhat double vision, and particularly at night. And they said, this won't do, and there's no way to correct this. And we'll give you got 3 choices. You can go home, you're still going to get drafted, or you can go into the Navy as a white hat in the fleet for 2 years, or go through pre-flight, and we'll recommission you. We'll commission you as a ground officer. So I chose the latter.
That seemed like the best choice.
That was the best. And And then I laid around on the white sand beaches of Pensacola for about 4 months. And finally a civilian got a hold of me one day and he says, "Son," he says, "I see you every day. What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm waiting for orders." And so he said, what did you do? And I said, "Well, after college I worked for a television station." And he says, "Okay." And so a couple of weeks go by and he says, "I got a job for you. It's in the Pentagon. And it's for the Office of Information, which reports directly to the Secretary of the Navy." And I said, "Well, hey, that sounds good. What would I do?" He says, "Well, there's a junior position in the radio television branch." Boy, did I grab that in a hurry. And it was the smartest thing that I ever did and the luckiest thing that I ever got, I'll really tell you, because what that led to was an entree to the television business on a pretty high level in New York, and great experience. And what we did, we when a producer wanted to do a series or a special or needed personnel, they had to come to me and ask me for permission. And of course, we reviewed scripts, and we got them footage, we got them personnel, we got them ships, we got them planes, and so forth. And it was just a tremendous job. And Ensign Simpson was the luckiest guy that ever lived, I will tell you.
So you met all of the producers and your probably future employers through that position, and then did end up in New York, and subsequently spent 40 years in the TV industry there.
That's right, 40 years. Mm-hmm.
So what was your first position there when you first went to New York? That must have been exciting. I know as an entertainer and a performer how exciting it is to finally get to the place where you want to be. Those years, were they fun? Were they challenging?
Well, yeah, they were.
Remember?
I'm the kind of guy who never gave anything second thought, really. As far as I just did it. That was the way I was taught. That when you have a job to do, you get out and you do it. And so I went to New York looking for a job, and in talking to a number of people, everybody seemed to think that what I did in the Navy would work working for an advertising agency, because what they did, they were coordinators between the clients and the networks. And
right.
In fact, in those days, this was the late 50s, many of the television programs were still being owned and controlled by advertisers. So I had 2 interviews, one at an agency called Young and Rubicam, and another one, J. Walter Dobson, and I got an offer from both of them. But only at Young and Rubicam would they say, well, you'll start as a trainee, but you will be in the television department. So I went for the interview, and they said, well, you have an interesting background, so forth, we'll call you. So they did call me and offered me the job. And this fellow, he says, I want to tell you the reason we're hiring you. He said, we've never hired any trainees in the television department. Now, this was a 65-man department. I mean, and it included all the people who produced commercials as well. And he said, the reason we're hiring you, he says, we have so many people here from the Ivy League. You're from Kansas, and we want some different blood in here. So that's how I got the job, really.
You were a minority in those times.
I was a minority, right.
And then, trying to give us a Reader's Digest version of your life in New York, you eventually ended up as the head of NBC, the daytime TV, and you ended up then with Time Magazine in London.
Right.
You did so many interesting things and met so many interesting people.
Well, what happened and what gave me that opportunity was that at Young and Rubicam, I worked there for 13 years and went up the ladder. And another interesting story, about 3 years at Y&R, and I didn't feel I was really making a lot of progress. So I went to see the guy who hired me, and I said to him, look, I just feel like I'm not getting ahead. There's all these guys that, they know everything, and I'm culture shock here. And he said, look, I'll tell you one thing. He says, what they know you can learn. What you know they'll never learn. And from then on, it all turned good, and I stuck it out and became head of the department, and that's when I then moved on to NBC as vice president for daytime programming.
I saw a picture of you, and it was for the 10th anniversary of Jeopardy!
Right. Mm-hmm.
Wow. When you think about how long Jeopardy's been on the air, how did you get involved with Jeopardy!
Well, Jeopardy was one of my programs that I was, was on the daytime schedule, and Art Fleming was the host then, long before Alex Trebek. And it was the 10th anniversary, and the powers above me said, "Look, Simpson, we're going to celebrate this on. It's a good promotional thing. We want you to go on air and present Art with this plaque," and that's what I did. And I've always joked with people in meetings, or not meetings, but social gatherings, and I'll say, "Look, they'll be talking about all their achievements." I say, "Well, you may have done that, but I bet none of you have ever been on Jeopardy, and I have."
Now, you were in charge of all daytime programming, so that also included the soaps and the game shows, pretty much all of that.
Right. Now, subsequently to that, I moved up to the East Coast programming job, which was the number 3 spot in the programming department there.
Wow. Now, you in those days, what are some of your fondest memories of your time in New York? People you met, things that really stand out for you, because you worked on so many different shows and worked with so many different people. Are there a couple of things that really stand out for you?
Well, there are some moments. One in particular, which was very typical of television back in the '60s, and at that time, Carol Channing was very big with her show Hello, Dolly, and everybody was trying to get Carol Channing onto a sitcom. Okay, and so we at Young and Rubicam went to her agent, and we got her to agree to do a sitcom, and we got Desi to produce it, Desi Arnaz. And so they did the show. This is just a big deal, big in the business. The Young and Rubicam for General Foods was our client that financed it. They got Carol Channing to do a sitcom. This was big stuff. So now we got to do a pilot, and the pilot comes in I guess around February, getting ready for all the new shows for the next season. And we look at the pilot. It is awful. It is terrible. And we just feel so badly. We didn't even want to show it to the client. So we went to CBS, and we says, "Look, we got the pilot now, and I tell you what, if you guys will pick up the cost of the pilot, we'll give you first shot at it." Man, they couldn't write a check fast enough. And call that dirty tricks, I don't know, but that was so typical of the business. It was an exciting business because when you're doing all this stuff and you're going out to California, I mean, it's pretty heady stuff, and meeting with all these people, these writers and directors and talent and everything, and you really have to keep your head on straight. And I had a lot of fun. It was interesting and beyond anything that I'd ever imagined that I would be doing, which made it just that much better.
Little boys from Kansas usually don't end up there.
That's true.
Now, you went to Time Magazine at some point and then actually worked coordinating with the BBC. Was that in London?
Well, I spent an awful lot of time going back and forth to London. Basically, this was Time Life Television, and we had a co-production arrangement, exclusive co-production arrangement with the BBC for those big series that were going to be distributed in the United States, and all on PBS, and usually supported by advertisers like Mobil and MetLife and so some of those other illustrious corporations. And so my job really was to stay in touch with the BBC and the producers to try to keep the people, the advertisers, updated as what was going on. I will admit that working with the BBC, you were not able to contribute very much creatively because they didn't want anybody to
Right.
contribute anything.
It was a closed shop.
But it was fun. I enjoyed the experience, and I did this for about 4 years, I think, as I recall. It was fun. I enjoyed it immensely.
Let's get back to turn the corner now, and I want to ask you, how did horses come back into your life? You're living in New York at this point.
All right.
You know, where did horses come back in, and how did Morgans enter the picture?
All right. There were two important episodes here. One, when I was head of television for Young and Rubicam, I took a vacation, the first vacation I'd had in 6 years, and we took a house in Cape Cod, and when I went in to sign the papers with the guy who owned the house, he lived. The house was on the beach, and his house was over the hill a ways. And I walked into his place, and I looked around. I says, "Gee," I said, I collect equine memorabilia for years. I said, I haven't had any horses since I was a teenager, but I said, and books. And I said, you've probably got almost as many horse books as I have. And he says, yeah, we have. He says, I've got Morgan horses. I've got a stallion and a mare with a foal down the barn. And I said, really? What are Morgans? I said, I never heard of Morgans. What are they like? So he told me a little bit about them. So anyway, what happened? My family enjoyed the beach. I enjoyed the horses. I rode the stallion around the field there, and I said, wow, I like this horse a lot. Not too long after that, I went to NBC, and NBC had the Disney Justin Morgan had a horse movie, and that really solidified the fact that I said, well, if I ever get horses again, I'm going to look at those Morgans. The other event that happened goes back when I was at NBC, and Jim Lipton, who's the host of Bravo's Inside the Actors Studio.
Can I add right here? Can I give him a shout out at this point, because this show, Equestrian Legends, is really taken after Inside the Actors Studio. It was designed because we love that show and been watching it for years, and we thought, there's nothing like it in the horse world. We really need, for historical record, to get some of these Equestrian Legends voices on tape. And now he's 100,000 times better than I'll ever be. But that's the impetus behind this show. So thank you to James Lipton for that.
Well, what happened was he was writing Peyton Place for me, and we had story conference every Wednesday afternoon. So he comes in one day, and he's in his riding outfit, boots and breeches and everything. And I knew what he was doing. I said, Jim, are you going to a costume party? And he says, no. He says, don't you know what I do? And I says, no, what do you do? He says, well, I ride. So I said, I used to ride years ago. I said, I haven't been on a horse in probably over 20 years, but I said, look, why don't we do some riding? He says, good. He started taking me out to this place north of New York City, about 20 miles, White Plains. And the first lesson was a group lesson. And meanwhile, I didn't have any riding equipment. In fact, when I was a kid, I didn't have any official, riding gear like jodhpurs, which you wear for saddle seat riding, or any boots or anything. I wore rather regular pants and Oxfords, and with clips that held my pants down. So I went down to Kaufman's, which was a big saddlery here in New York City, and I bought all this equipment, and I took it out there, and they could tell I was a greenhorn. Everything was brand new, and I rode. It was a 2-hour lesson, group lesson, and the next day I was sore. The following day I couldn't get out of bed. But that's how I really got interested again in horses, and said, I'm going to get a horse. I'm going to ride, and that's when I began looking for a place where I currently live. That was 40 years ago.
And that was in New York, just north of New York City, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And was it in 1972 that you bought Benefield's Ace, a daughter
right.
of Benefield's Ace?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And was that your first horse then? At that point?
That was my first Morgan, right? And really the breeding on her top side was a breeding a bloodline called Benfield, and that became really the cornerstone of my breeding right up to this day.
And at that point, you started your breeding and really had a number of horses from that point on.
We had quite a few horses here, and my kids were all in their teens, and the three older kids, and they rode and they showed, and we did it as a family thing, and because of my nature, I thought I could do everything, only to realize down the road, many years later, that probably using a professional trainer is the better part of valor. If you want to go to Oklahoma and win championships, it's better to do it that way. But we all learn from our past experiences, whether they're failures or successes.
Now, were you doing Park Saddle at that point, or?
Well, if I had a park horse, I was. I had one stallion who was a true park horse, but most of it was pleasure driving, and riding, and which is a discipline within the horse show arena. And we had some really good in-hand horses. My first filly was that Panorama Marita. The first one I bought did extremely well in hand, and I showed her myself. But park horses have always been my because that goes back to my saddlebred days with the high steppers, and as I said, I'm a high stepper kind of guy, and that's why I like the park horses.
Now, in 1996, you had a surgery that didn't go so well, and from what I read, that really affected what happened after in your life.
It sure did. A medical injury, a mistake that cut my sciatic nerve and left me without my right leg, and it took me several years of rehabbing before I could even think about getting on a horse. And when I did, I was totally lost because the leg had lost its capability of knowing where it was at. So I went to an old friend who was one of the top equitation teachers in the Oregon breed, and began riding with her. And
that was Barbara Irvine?
Barbara Irvine, right.
Yeah.
And I took my first lesson, which I'd never, and in fact, I had never had a riding lesson in my life, even though my daughters had experienced that from a great horseman, a fellow by the name of Joe Venorio, who is a legend. She told me, she says, look, I know you've been riding all your life, but you do so many things wrong, I'm not going to try to correct them all, particularly your age. And I think I was like 68 at that point, something like that. And so I said, fine, let's Trojan on here. And so we did. And finally she came to me and she says, look, you're making progress, but unless you can ride with me, 2 or 3 times a week, I don't think I can make a really good show rider out of you. And I said, I can't do that. You're 2 hours away. So we go along, and I guess this was in the fall, just before Christmas. I walked in and said, let's buy me a show horse. And that's what changed everything at that point. And that's when we began looking for I wanted a contender. I didn't want to buy a ribbon. I didn't want to buy a proven winner. I wanted a contender, not necessarily a project, which was what we ended up getting, a project. And but it had a happy ending to it.
Yeah, tell us about that project.
I engaged the services of a professional trainer, a fellow by the name of Rick Stevens, who sadly passed away this past fall. And I bred a couple of stallions that he had stood, and I called him and said, look, I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, well, let's find you a horse. So we went down to Kentucky at Keeneland, a big sale. They have big saddlebred shows down there. All kinds of breeds have shows down there. And so there were 85 horses at this particular sale. And I said, gosh, it's got to be a horse for me. So we went down. There was nothing there. And finally, he called me one night. We were back, and he said, I found a horse for you, but don't bring your irons because you're not going to ride her. And I says, hey, the whole idea is we're into April, and it's time now. The show's going to be starting. He says, well, I'll let you give it a shot, but not tomorrow night. So went down, saw this mare. She's up in New Hampshire, and they rode her around the ring 3 times. And I said, that's enough. And we went over in the corner, and I said, let's buy her. So we made the deal, and I shipped the horse to him. And as it turned out, I tried to ride her, and I just was not capable because of her particular cadence that she had. She was a true park horse with a very balanced cadence, high in front and high behind. And so it took me then through that season. Rick had shown her a couple of times, and then that winter I rode every weekend, and it took me 4 months before I was able to really ride her. And we went off to our first show, which was the big Connecticut show at the Big E in Connecticut, in Massachusetts. And I get there, and he says, "Look," he said, "you're not going to ride in the amateur division." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Your mare is not doesn't have the manners for it, and I don't want you in there with a bunch of cowgirls with their equitation horses." He says, "This is better. You got to ride in the open division." So I rode in the open division, and we started winning. But we also got let out of the ring a number of times because the mare was so hot. And
we're teasing everybody. This
right.
is Sabrina, of course.
Yeah, that was Sabrina, and it was just one of the most exciting times of my whole equine career.
And Sabrina went on in 2002 to be named Morgan Horse of the Year. You came a long way very quickly.
We did, and that was for the UPHA here in on the East Coast, and I was an Amateur of the Year, and it was interesting that we were originally nominated not by Morgan people for the UPHA, but for saddlebred people who'd seen me ride her at a UPHA show, which was kind of a strange thing.
Now, is it true that it took 2 people to hold her? The story is it took 2 people to hold her for you to even get in the saddle?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. She was, I've seen a lot of harness horses who you hook them on the fly, and the minute you put that check on, they're gone.
Yep.
But she was just so hot. And the thing was that you really had to ride her with light hands, but you couldn't throw her away because she needed direction. Every time you go in the ring, that first way around the ring, she gave you a buck. It just was going to happen, and you had to be prepared for that. But
I don't want people to lose sight either, Claire, of something here that I think we've sort of brushed over. And I think it's important for this conversation is at what age were you when this all started again?
I was 69. Mm-hmm.
So, you started at the 69 and then, taking your world championships and everything. I didn't want to, overlook that and bypass that because that gives everybody hope that you're never too old to start with horses. It's one of the blessings.
Not, and I'm not your normal 69-year-old. In that I'm a very determined person. I'm very goal-oriented, and that's what it's all about. It's about having goals, sitting down, and saying, this is what I have to do to achieve it. And don't tell me that I'm not going to get there, because if you do that, it just makes me work all that much harder. Because I was told, after I bought her, and people saw her in the show ring with a professional, they said, and this was, all the talk in the barns, that old guy will never get her in the ring. They never will. And I was determined to get her in the ring, and I did.
At what point did you retire from the TV world?
Oh, golly, 20 years ago.
Okay,
probably.
So you got into this after you retired from the
TV
world.
Yeah. It was.
And there were many more horses to come. The couple of them that I came across were Zeus. Winterset
right.
Zeus.
He's out of Sabrina, right?
Okay.
In fact, at the big New England show, which they had this year, I think it was 700 or 800 horses which is the next to Oklahoma, is where the Grand National is held, is the largest Morgan show. Sabrina did well. She had another gelding that was the amateur hunter pleasure champion, which was a big win for New England.
Now, was Time and Again out of Sabrina as well?
No. Time and Again was out of a mare that we bred, Winterset Garbo, and she was she and another stallion were the lone survivors of a fire that we had in 91, and we lost everything here. And so I brought them back, and we started all over again. And but Time and Again was by a stallion called HBK Belfleur. That's Herb Kohler, who Kohler Industries has been for years one of the biggest breeders of Morgan horses, and this was a stallion that was a world champion in hand, in harness, and in saddle. And he is the stallion that I have here at home now, and he's the one I ride, and he is the epitome of what a Morgan stallion should look like. I'm very lucky to have him.
Now, you were good friends, we talked about earlier, with James Lipton, and of course James Lipton is a jumper. Did you ever dive into the jumping world?
I not with Morgans, no. I never have. My daughter did some when she was a teenager with her Morgan, but she did mostly roadster. She was and New England used to have these road races because it was a half-mile track there in Northampton, and she used to race her mare there every year.
So, of your 4 children, how many ended up being horsey?
2. The 2 girls. The 2 boys, no.
Football?
Actually, my oldest son did play some football, but my youngest son is, and I did not encourage him because I didn't want him to suffer with all the injuries that came about, and which I still battle with today.
So what about right now? Are you still breeding? You still showing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm not a person who can just sit idly by and get on a horse and get out on the trail, which we have fabulous trails here. This is an area that with a lot of celebrities. Martha Stewart is right across the way from me here with her 6 Friesians, and we've got Ralph Lauren over here with his horses, and Glenn Close with hers, and the list goes on and on and on. But when I get on a horse, I always have a plan in mind, and it's say today this is what we're going to accomplish, whether it's for him or whether it's for me, and that's just the kind of person that I am. And we don't have that many foals anymore. I've only got the stallion and 2 brood mares, and we have 1 2-year-old filly in training right now. I have a 3-month-old colt who is out of Sabrina by my stallion, and that's a first. And my goal is to keep on riding, and my goal is to breed another champion for Oklahoma, and by golly, I want to be on top of it. I mean, and I realize that time is short, but that's what drives you, though, to work hard, to stay in condition, and to keep at it. And I know no other way to do it. I just don't. I can't just relax and enjoy it. I didn't mean to say it's work, but it is work to do it like I do.
Well, now before we run out of time here, there's something that we have to touch on, because I married into the horse world 25 years ago, and you also married about 30 years ago to your wife Susan, who apparently you must have met at work.
Yes, we did. We met in the city. At one point in my career, I had my own little business, and I was acquiring format rights from British sitcoms. And I had one, and I took it to one of the Procter & Gamble agencies, and they liked the idea. And then Procter & Gamble took that and gave it to an agency where Susan happened to be the entertainment lawyer. And then they said, look, you have to negotiate this deal with her, and that's how I met her.
Wow. And now you've been married 30 years. Did you convert her into a horse girl?
Not really. Not really. But it's like this. We have a beach house in Groton Long Point in Connecticut, and she loves to go there. And I have horse shows, which I love to go to. And we have a deal. If it's important for me to be at the beach house for some dinner or something, I'm there. If it's important for her to be at a horse show, she's there. And that's the way it works.
Well, there you go. That's terrific. Couple of questions, James Lipton style here at the end. Mm-hmm. What is there a passion outside of horses at this point?
I guess there's a passion for life, but this is basically a new life for me because it's a second life, and it's allowed me to forge a whole new thing with my life. And the great thing about it is a whole new set of friends. Every time you breed somebody's mare to your stud, you make a friend. Every time you sell a horse to somebody, you make a friend. And they're scattered all over the country. It's just a great thing for any family. And it's not for everybody because it's a tremendous amount of work. But it's given me a whole new lease on life. I'll tell you, the television business is demanding. The pressures are great. And even when I was in that business and had horses, it was a relief to I had some place to go. I had a place where no one was going to scream at me and who would love me and like me, and I would return it to them. So it's what I am today, and it's what I want to be for, I guess, the rest of my life.
That leads me to my next question is, after being 40 years in the TV industry, do you even watch TV anymore?
No.
I thought that might be the answer.
I'll be very honest with you. I'm a real news addict, both newspapers, television. I watch a lot of news. I really do. I read 2 newspapers every day, cover to cover. But in terms of the entertainment, no. And neither does my wife, who is still involved in television business. There is one program, which we've talked about already, that we watch every night, and that's Jeopardy.
Mm. Oh, really? Still?
Really, still. And I knew Merv Griffin very early on, and Merv was one of my first television assignments was a show out of 8H and 30 Rockefeller on Saturday nights called Saturday Night Prom, and Merv was the host. And then the show went off the air and so forth. And years later, I run into him down at NBC. He was there for something, and he had a remarkable memory and never forgot a name. And I said, Merv, how are your horses? He said, that's right. He says, I knew you when I had all those quarter horses in New Jersey. And I said, well, guess what? I got Morgan's. And I says, but I moved out in the country, and it's a hell of a commute. He says, well, do what I used to do. And I said, what's that? Take the helicopter in. That's Merv.
Now, was he as intense as he seemed to be?
Not really.
Okay.
A bright, brilliant man, and as you know, made zillions in real estate. He was always a friendly guy. Had a very easygoing manner. Hard worker, but very, very smart. Very smart. It's interesting about people in entertainment, if I can just do a little aside here. There are numerous people entertainers, who get into horses. And some who had, I forget the fellow who had the Kentucky Derby, I'll think of his name one of these days, and several others. And they'll tell you, and they had Kentucky Derby contenders or horses doing this and that. And Merv, too. Merv had a contender at one point. And to a man, to a woman, they will tell you all the Emmys, the Oscars and stuff that I've acquired, done this and that, the awards I've gotten. There is nothing like having a win with a horse. I mean, this happens all the time, and it shows you the power of these wonderful animals.
One more question: for the teenagers coming up today who want to make horses a living, and for all of those coming up in the show world, what would you tell them? What have you learned, and what advice would you give them?
Well, first of all, I'd say get an education first, because it's almost like don't quit your day job. Mm-hmm. It is a very difficult profession. It helps if you have financing from somewhere, because if you're going to make it a profession, say as a trainer, it is a difficult job, and it takes forever to really build a business. And the most trainers acquire, if they can acquire property, real estate, so they have some equity. That provides some kind of a cushion for them. But there are so many young trainers that just literally live, hand them out. Now, in terms of young people to learn how to ride and so forth, it is a great recreational thing. It requires a tremendous amount of energy and focus. I mean, you learn how to when they talk about an independent seat, they mean it, because you got to be, all your parts of the body have to be independent. And I think it's just a wonderful outlet for kids. I never had to worry about my kids, because I knew when they got home from school where they were in the barn.
Well, Clare, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. This has been a whole lot of fun. I was looking forward to this all week. And, we didn't touch on all of the things that we could have talked about here today, because there's so much more. And we're going to have to do this again in another couple of years, because you're still competing.
Absolutely.
We're going to have many more championships to talk about in the future. Best of luck.
Thank you.